Footy Talk, Journo's edition with a twist today. Adam Peacock here, as always, with Danny Weidler. How are you, Danny?
Adam, I'm very well. Very well. Interesting Journo's edition this week.
Yes. Well, he's worked in the media for a very long time. And I do note that Michael Chammas has left the country, and joining us in his seat today is Phil Gould, involved with the Bulldogs, of course, and Channel 9, and pondering his response as we speak now.
I'm about to walk out if I'm being touted as a journalist. I don't want to be known as one of them.
You just know the media.
Yeah, but I'm not a journalist.
Journalist edition.
Is this the journalist edition? You got the wrong bloke.
It's the media edition. Let's call it the media edition.
Okay.
And Gus probably knows more than all the journos combined, unfortunately. So he'd be a good journo. He'd be a good journo.
No.
Do you ever think about it?
No, never ever.
But media has been a huge part of your life. I mean,
by accident. That was never planned. It was never ever planned to be. I still don't regard myself as media.
I know you say it. He bags it. He goes, "Oh, you media, you media."
You media, yeah.
It's one of your favourites.
You're different. You're like referees. You're different.
Oh.
You just see the world differently.
Don't go there. You've been there once this year.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not go back there.
No stupid comments on this pod. You can't make, because it's a podcast. You know, players come on podcasts and they make comments that get them in trouble. You can't call the game the S word.
In more than enough trouble.
The S word.
Yeah.
Let's start with the rugby league media. In your time in the game, from player to coach to what you're doing now with the Bulldogs, and also being involved with Channel 9 and writing for the Sun Herald when you did, how's rugby league reporting changed?
Oh,
in your
wow.
eyes?
It's a different planet to what it was back then. I mean, but look at the world of media as it is today, with social media and all those different types of media that we, and how we access our information and how we access all sorts of media, whether it be digital, viewing or listening or podcasts and all this sort of thing. I mean, anyone can virtually work in the media if they've got some sort of profile and ability to get a message out there. But back when I started, as a kid, and I think now back, when you fall in love with the game, I used to read everything that was in the newspapers about rugby league, and you'd sort of wait for the Big League magazine to come out, and then it was Rugby League Week, and anything to do with rugby league you'd sort of absorb. I only ever read the back 3 pages of the paper. I never read any other part of the paper.
What about the form guide?
Well, you just took that out of the middle. So, but media, the world of media has changed. Back then, it was really different. And we actually socialised with journalists back in those days. So after the game, they'd be back at the club having a beer with you or whatever, and they'd go on trips with you if you. And you actually had relationships with the media people there, and they were sort of part of the rugby league fabric, where now it's kind of they're over there and you're over here, and there's a bit of a divide between them in a lot of respects.
Is that better or worse? Do you like the divide or not?
I think it was better for the game.
When they were
I think
closer?
it was better for the game. I mean, I really think around the time the Super League war hit, that's where the mentality of media changed in particular, because that was a media war, and therefore people on both sides of that war were sort of seen to take sides with media organisations. And I think that's where a lot of then, how can I say, the tolerance of the media for players' behaviour, scrutiny on behaviour, exacerbating performance and all that sort of thing really started to click up. And then they found that sold papers, and that's when all that started. But prior to that, it was very, very different, your relationship with the media and its relationship with the game and the people within the game. I'm not saying there aren't relationships today, and there are, but it's a bit of a minefield for the inexperienced.
Does that line up with your perspective for what you've lived as well? Being involved in the media for a while.
I mean, I haven't been around as long as Gus. I'm probably 10 years, 11 years younger than Gus. But I remember when I first started, you would be able to just walk into a dressing room and speak to a player. You'd pick up a phone, do an interview with a player, and the club wouldn't know. They'd read about it. From my perspective, they wouldn't know. So you'd have much more direct access. Now, you ring a player and you'll get a call back from a club. You can't, if the player doesn't know you well enough, he'll get the club to call you back. You can't just ring up for a chat easily unless you've established a relationship with that player. And I'm a lot older now, so it's a lot harder for me to establish relationships with, just say, a 20-year-old like Lockie Galvin, for example. Like he doesn't want to speak to an old bloke like me, and even younger journos is probably the same as well. Like they might have a better chance, but they have these barriers put in place. They've got media managers, and and I think the players are a lot more wary of the media, and especially those who don't understand what we do. I mean, I think you can use the media to your advantage really well, but there is a fear in terms of trusting the person you're speaking to.
Back in like when I started in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have media managers.
No.
We didn't have media managers in the 90s. But we found we ended up having to need a media manager to manage all these types of things. And I think today, for many clubs, there'll be a nervousness about young players being accessed too easily by the media. They want to control everything that the player and who they talk to and when they talk to them. It's part of their education. I know a part of everything we do with players is around media education, their handling of social media, whether it's been they're saying it or something it's being said about them. I mean, there's a whole range of things there. So I think there's a sensitivity with clubs around the education of players and who they actually access and why certain members of the media might be trying to get or target or speak to a young player. So, and that's come because we've got professional people now in clubs that look after that sort of thing. Back years ago, journalists could ring you up at home out of the blue for nothing. You just talk to him and you had no worries or no trust issues about what he wanted. No one was trying to trick you into a headline or get you to bag something else or criticise something else, So that's been pretty much a learned skill for us dumb footballers over the years, and that's what we've had to that's the minefield we've had to manage.
I remember, like, you probably don't remember, Gus, but when I first started, one of the most confronting things I ever dealt with was meeting Gus. You wouldn't remember, I don't think you remember, but I was dating a girl, and I turned up at this person's house, and I walked into the house, and they're sitting on the couch or lying on the couch was Gus Gould.
That was Ross's house. Waverton. Over in,
Hang on.
There.
What?
I turned up. He was there on the couch eating twisties. Probably you're eating twisties or a picnic and having a can of Coke. That sounds like you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And sitting next to Gus on the couch, so he's his friend Ross.
Yeah.
Who was your stats video sort of guy, wasn't he?
He was kind of one of the game's
best
first
mates.
analysts.
Yeah.
Is this at Penrith or Roosters?
This would have been at
Bulldogs,
Roosters.
maybe, or Bulldogs.
Bulldogs by then, yeah. Bulldogs by
early
then.
early days.
Bulldogs, yeah. About 88, 89.
Yeah, you won the comp, 88.
88, yeah.
And I walked in, and there's Gus, and sitting next to him is another cool-looking guy who was the lead singer of
Boom Crash Opera.
Boom Crash Opera.
Really?
So Ross was a tour manager for Boom Crash Opera. Ross was a lot of things. He managed a lot
Ross Seymour, yeah.
Yeah, Ross Seymour. I won't go into his whole past. He's passed away 10 years ago, so I can't defame him. But
You can
he went through a period there where he managed a lot of nightclubs around Sydney. Springfield. His mate managed Springfield.
Okay.
I ran into Marty Clapp the other day. I was up at Byron Bay. This old grey-headed bloke come in and introduced him. Oh, Marty Clapp. He said, Marty Clapp used to have Springfields up at the King's
Do you know what Springfield's? No, you're too young.
Was it Simpsons? It's the
An old nightclub.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ross managed band, and Ross used to he managed Boom Crash Opera. They went on an Australian tour. I met up with him a few times around on the tour. They were great blokes, Boom Crash Opera.
God, that scared me though.
Yeah,
Like I didn't know Gus. And I dealt with him briefly, like I just started.
Yeah.
And there he is sitting on the couch. Oh, jeez.
well, I was really young back then.
Yeah, so was I.
Yeah.
Those were good old days.
What happened to the relationship with the
Oh,
girl?
yeah, it lasted for a while.
Okay.
She's a lovely girl.
Was that Ross's daughter?
His stepdaughter.
His stepdaughter.
Yeah. Became a journo.
Did you get a yarn out of it, though, out of Gus?
Well, I've developed a relationship with Gus
Yeah.
for over a long period of time, and I consider Gus a friend, and I consider him someone I trust, and probably doesn't think the same way back. But we've had our blues in the time, and we've had differences, but we both come from a similar place, so it's good.
I think the thing with Danny over the years, he's one of those blokes that sort of never wavered from the style of journalist he sort of was. I mean, he researches everything pretty closely. He's got a great contact list. He works hard to get the stories that he gets, and every now and then he might get some of it wrong, but he's got enough of the facts to make it fairly legitimate. There's very little. He doesn't make stories up, which a lot of the journalists will do. He doesn't necessarily embellish or exaggerate or kind of say like a gender-driven context to the story, where a lot of our journalism is like that. It's sensationalised, what have you, but he's pretty hard-hitting too. I mean, I think he would upset a lot of people in the game because he gets stories that a lot of people wouldn't want known.
We'll just ask him at 5 a.m. on a Sunday when his column drops and he's invariably getting a call from someone somewhere. So
yeah, but he's been sort of fearless in that.
Yeah.
And I think to survive in that game, in that sort of journalist role, you've got to be fearless. Otherwise, you don't stand out.
I can retire now. That's
go.
a nice thing anybody said about me.
Thank you, Gus. The ultimate endorsement.
Thank you, Gus.
Yeah.
We've had our differences, though, but I mean, like...
I've put him in the sin bin a couple of times.
Yeah.
How long's the bin last? Not 10 minutes, I'm guessing.
It can last a while.
Yeah.
Some aren't out
Sometimes
of
I'm out of work too, so I don't have to talk to him.
Fair enough. Hey, what about when, over the years, like when your phone rings and you look down and you see the name and you either think to yourself, oh no, what does he want? Or you're not shudder, but you go... why are they calling me?
I don't necessarily shudder. I don't necessarily answer most of it. I mean, these days. I mean, back in the day, I probably would have. And there wasn't call recognition back when we first all started. Like when I started, there was no mobile phones. They had to ring at home. I mean, you were never at home. We didn't have phones in our cars, and we didn't have phones on us when we walked around.
Explain that to a 10-year-old now.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
ridiculous.
No, ridiculous. So there was no communication back then. And a journalist might come to training. Maybe one night a week if there was a big story, but very, very rarely. You'd see them on game day. And for 90% of us who were average players, you very rarely spoke to them unless you won a man of the match or something happened in the game they wanted to talk to you about, or you got picked for a rep side. It was mainly the really stars that had to deal with that, but not on a grand scale. My first real experience came after I coached at the Bulldogs and won a premiership. I think it was the Daily Telegraph approached me about a column, a weekly column. They used to have sort of some of the footballers with weekly columns, and I'd won a comp, and it wasn't really a column because they'd ring up and ask a couple of questions, and they'd write the column for me. It was what they call ghosting, you know. That went on for a couple of years until I got sick of that and sort of left that. Then I went back and did it again, and then Super League broke, and
then you end up at the Sun Herald, didn't you? I can remember.
Yeah,
and unlike a lot of people,
well, Bob Fulton and I were both writing for the Telegraph at the time. When Super League broke, and we weren't included in on any of those conversations. And 2 weeks later, we were both working at Fairfax at the Herald.
And unlike a lot of people, I mean, I was on the other side of that. I was at the Herald back then. I think it would have been mid-90s. I was there in '96, but I remember Gus would write his column. He would labour over it. I mean, you probably do it easy, but I mean, you would get one version on a Thursday, you might get another version on Thursday night, then you might get another version, because for whatever you want to, he's a perfectionist. Like when he does something, he does it. He dots the I's, crosses the T's, and like I don't know many other sporting people. Like I don't even know if Wayne Bennett would have written his own column. I don't think he did, but I think Gus would sit there and write it. I don't know where that's how you always were, wasn't it? Like you always wanted to do that?
Yeah, so like in the early days, it was just cosmetic stuff. You know, they'd pay you $100 a week or something or other and use your name to put on a column head, and they'd ring you up and ask you a couple of questions on the topic of the week, and you'd do that, you know. But when sort of Super League hit and we were sort of in that sort of fight, I wanted to make sure that every word that was ever printed attributed to me came exactly from me, and it wasn't another journalist's interpretation on it. And there were some fairly serious issues back in those days, and it was a fairly fierce competition. So, and I couldn't type. I'd never learnt to type. So I would write everything out handwritten, and I might write 3 columns during a week or 3 versions of the same column to make sure to get it out. And then it got to the point where I didn't want them to edit it. I didn't want them to shorten it. You know, if they didn't cop what I gave them, I'd say, don't put it in. You know, like I want whatever I put in to be exactly my words and go from there. And that's where it sort of started at Fairfax. But that's kind of where my involvement with the media started. It started mainly with Super League is where it started.
With and you went on to write articles for a while for the Sun Herald, and it was always, from memory, it wasn't the Sun Herald, it was in the Sydney Morning Herald. It was on the Sunday game. It was on Channel 9. And then you'd get really analytical about how a game was won and where that team or those teams were headed, whatever. Which brings me to my next question of you. Is there enough analytical coverage of the game now in terms of print, in terms of electronic media, or is it too focused on sensationalism? Who's going where? Who's doing what? Who's seeing who off the park?
It's a great question because I think the answer is obvious. But also I haven't read a newspaper for 20 years or more. I mean, I stopped reading newspapers because of a lot of the rubbish that was in it, and I just didn't need to see what was in it. But there is more analytical analysis of our game now than ever before. We've got magazine shows, we've got pay television, we've got free-to-air television, we've got radio stations now that are all covering it. Everyone's got podcasts, ex-players, ex-coaches, everyone. There are so many people commenting about the game and having their opinions on the game, and it's hard for coaches these days not to sort of screen their players from that, and to screen young players from that, to screen parents from that, to screen player managers from that. It's so influential on them and makes it so difficult, for bringing kids through and educating them in the right ways too, because a lot of it is sensationalised. A lot of it is, some of the stuff that you're reading in the papers about judging team performances or players' performances are not the metrics that we use internally for educating and assessing players and the way we interpret the game. It's kind of like this cookie cutter approach to, the way the games are analysed, but until you actually hear one of the really great ex-players sort of explain something. And I think it's more now done in sort of visual form and verbal form rather than written. I think there are very, very, very few actual journalists that are writing analytical pieces about rugby league.
In all honesty, I don't think, this is a bit of a slap at all, Joe. I don't think that's what they're looking for always, the analytics, the ins
No, they're
and outs.
not. No, they're not.
We're looking for a story. Like, if I'm watching a game, I'm cheering the story or I'm cheering the result for a story rather than I don't pretend to understand. I can talk to.
It's always daunting coaching an Origin team. You've got journalists over there hoping someone breaks their leg at training. That's the story.
Well, we're not
hiding in the bushes.
We're not hoping for that, but we're hoping for the story. It's,
as I've said, what my experience for the last 20 years is that football's like reality television. Football's like a reality show, and all the football is the window into their private lives. That's the opportunity for the media and the journalists to look into their private lives, because that's the story.
What's a soap opera, Gus?
That's the
It's a
story.
soap opera.
It's like reality TV. It's like everything else. People, that's the stuff that
And that's
sells.
what drives. I know Chammy is usually here and he knows the analytics, but I reckon that's what drives stuff. Like people getting insights into players' lives, what club they're going to, all that's what people
That
want
at the moment just sings.
Okay,
Like
so
if we put a social media post about Ben Hunt, which has been the narrative, and that's now pretty much tied up. But if we had sat here and second guessed about where he's going to go next,
But journalists get instant feedback these days. Media gets instant feedback back these days about who's clicking on to your website, who's reading your column, and what it is. And they'll learn that if they write about this particular person or that particular team or this particular subject, there is immediate impact. There is immediate impact.
Well,
But if they're going to write a story about, how did the Panthers beat Melbourne Storm in the grand final this week, people, they just don't read it by comparison with the other sort of columns.
Look, you're sitting here, but you're clickbait, Gus. You obviously click for News Corp write about your life. We're not getting into a News Corp bash up, but I'm just saying that you get written about how factual it is. I'm not always sure, but you get written about a lot. So obviously you must click for their readers or everybody's readers. Because I think you're a hard person generally to access for a lot of people, you get this aura about you, or you become a little bit mystical, or is that right? Is that a word? Mystic? I don't know.
he's a mystic.
Yeah, whatever he is, but it's hard to hard to get a grip on him.
Like a Wayne Bennett type. Like Wayne
people
Bennett
who
clips,
people can't
things like
access,
that.
and they go, what's Gus got to say about this? Or
But they've got authority in the game. So
I don't see that though.
But you get mentioned a lot. Like you're on Twitter, right? You get mentioned a lot. You see stuff on there. Like I think you're the only. Are there any other league officials or?
I'm a bit immune to it, to be honest. I don't actually catch it as much as you think I do.
Well, you respond sometimes. You give them a little slap sometimes. Or
if someone engages me on social media, I might give them some, but it's usually in jest anyway. That's just fun and games. But but I don't see a lot of what you refer to, and I don't hear a lot of what you refer to.
Well, you must rate. I don't know either, but I'm just saying there's
some of it can be quite obsessive.
That's what I'm saying. There's an obsession with.
I just
writing.
know from my other employers how many inquiries they get about what am I doing, where am I, why aren't I here, why aren't I there, or what have I done? You know, like they get inundated with it. You know,
With the Bulldogs.
or sack him. You know.
Yeah. With the Bulldogs, it's certainly not the case at the moment because it feels like everything's moving in the right direction. I went to a couple of games this year where it just felt like a festival, the home games. It was brilliant, the atmosphere, the noise and whatnot. But the narrative outside is that this is a club hurtling in the right direction. But you're there as GM. If we can get on to a bit about the Bulldogs, not the nuts and bolts because you won't give it up anyway, but how the club is progressing. Is it matching what the sentiment is out there? You're saying that the media is the window to the public having a perception about a club. Is it really humming along?
Yeah, and I'm hoping it's going to be a good story. Well, I'm confident it will be down the track. If I go back, I actually knocked back that job 3 or 4 times. I'd had 3 or 4 inquiries in the years leading up to actually accepting a position there.
Is that when you're at the Warriors or when you're at
Even when I was back at Panthers.
Really?
I'm talking back, 2015, 2016.
the GM job?
No, there was a coaching offer and then a GM offer, but that's sort of back in the day. But the Bulldogs had been through a terrible time. They'd been through a struggling period and then kind of lost its way as a club, and I think they'll admit that. I think there was one period there they went through about 3 board elections and they had 3 or 4 chairmen and 3 or 4 CEOs and they had like 3 or 4 coaches in the space of 3 or 4 years. So, and when I got there, they'd sort of been last on the ladder for a couple of years. So it was a club that was damaged and being in a losing football club is no place to be. It's not enjoyable. Everyone in the organisation gets judged by that scoreboard on the weekend and, it makes for a difficult environment and that affects sponsorship, it affects crowds, it affects membership, it affects recruitment, it affects junior recruitment and development. It affects so much, that scoreboard on a Sunday. Everyone gets judged by that. So it's been a big job, but I'm probably lucky that I had a big involvement with the club back in the 80s when it was a very big and successful club, both as a coach and a player.
Is that why you did it?
And followed, probably in the end, yeah. I'd sort of knocked it back a couple of times simply because, to be honest, I didn't know if I could fix it. I didn't, from everything I was hearing, I didn't know if I could fix it and whether or not we could stabilise it. The biggest thing is stability at the top. The biggest thing is leadership and stability at the top, and it all starts there. And everything filters down from that. And I just didn't know how we were going to do that, but thankfully we have. And then the football side of it's always the easiest part, but it's a long-term part.
So football side looked hard a few years ago when
Well, it is hard. It's hard in the beginning. It's hard if you do it right because you've got to make some big decisions. You've got to be a bit ruthless with it and go from there. And you also need investment. You need investment in what I think is the solution to every club and the solution to the game, which is investment in junior development and developing your future from within and building the DNA of your club. And I think the Bulldogs had lost their DNA during that period. And during this period, we've been able to reconnect with many of our successful eras and many of our successful players and people that have been with us, even sponsors and members over a period of time. And that's where corporately, our administration and Aaron Warburton have done a great job corporately. They've done a great job with the membership base, but they can't do that unless we're winning games and unless we're showing some promise on the field, So obviously it's difficult to turn those results around because this competition is extremely competitive and there are so many teams now and the competition for players and quality talent is quite fierce and it costs a lot of money if you're going to try and buy your way out of trouble, and you can't. That's only a short-term solution. So we've taken the long route, but I think we've come a long way in just 2 short years. This year was only really the start of it. The first year was like tearing it down. Like we replaced our whole roster, top 30 roster, all our coaches, all our staff.
The whole roster?
The whole roster. So from when I first walked in 2021, exactly 2 years later, we had a completely different top 30, completely different coaching and high-performance staff, completely different, whole outlook on the club. And this year was really the start of what we were trying to do, and we've had a great year compared to, I suppose, what most people expected. But it's only the start. I mean, we're only just getting started now. And if I look at where we are right at the moment for 2026, which is only sort of 15 months away, We've only got 20 players signed. 3 or 4 of those are young fellas.
So you're thinking already to 226.
Well, I'm always thinking 2 and 3 years down the track.
Mm.
So when I start in 21, I'm thinking our chance. Firstly, salary cap wise, we were gone by 2023. The end
What
of
does gone mean? What do you mean?
Well, our salary cap was so, it's hard
Out
to
of
explain
whack.
without actually showing you, but it was so out of whack, and we had to restore that. And I sort of set a goal within 2 years we had to reestablish the value in our salary cap, or at least get our salary cap in some sort of framework kicking forward. And I thought we could turn the roster over in 2 years, which is rather ambitious. I don't think anyone else would attempt to do that, nor would they try to do it, but we did. And it produced a team this year with a completely different culture and personality about it. We actually went around a long way under the salary cap this year, a long way under the salary cap.
Can you give us a figure?
So we were about 700,000 under the cap, and then there was about another 900,000 that we paid the players to leave. So that's about 1.6, and then we had several players who didn't play a game this year. That took up probably another $1 million or so. So we were close to $3 million under the cap with the quality of our player roster, or the value of our player roster. That's before someone gets injured. That's before we're missing players on a weekend. So they did an outstanding job. But what it's been able to do is put real value back in our salary cap, and then be able to plan what it looks like 2 years down the track. So we've sort of got models for 2026, 2027, 2028.
So is there a whiteboard? Is that how you, where's this model?
There's a war room. Yeah, it's all there.
War room.
A lot of it's
I'd
in my...
like to get in there.
Do not tell him
Can
about
I-
those
can I-
things.
Well,
'cause-
I actually presented to it. Cameron got me to present to our Stacey and high performance stuff, because they don't get to see a lot of all that. It's pretty much between me and the coach and our recruitment team and all that sort of thing. But
How do I get in the war room, Gus?
So it's sort of like it was.
happening,
I'd have to kill you before you left.
Not
Danny.
happening, I don't think.
I'd have to kill you. But it was sort of. So I presented to her and I said, "This is our roster for next year going forward. This is your roster for 2026 as it currently stands. There are a number of positions to fill here. I don't tell them the money that we've got available to do that.
But do you have players you're going to recruit on that list, or you don't? Is that too hard to?
So the recruitment team will send me a list of, like the media. The media makes this big thing
Including
about
you.
November 1. The media, November 1. All of a sudden we've got to sign our players 12 months in advance. Why? I don't know. You make
That's the NRL's fault.
November 1 comes and goes and nothing happens, and no one's
A bit happened.
nothing.
Not much.
So
Not much.
So I said, here's a list of all the players that might be off contract with other clubs in 12 months' time. Now, the vast majority of them will stay at their clubs. There will be very few of those that look to move. Some will go out into the marketplace now, which is the big media story. They might put themselves on the market to reassess their values. Sometimes their club puts them on the because they think the player's being unrealistic. But if you think you can get that somewhere else, go and get it, But these are the number of positions we've got to fill. But here are 30 kids that I've identified in our Pathways program. And in our last couple of years, we've won a Harold Matts competition. We were minor premiers and grand finalists in an SG ball competition. We've won 2 Jersey Flag under-20s competitions. So we've got to be doing something right there. There's got to be some good kids there. So I've identified 30 kids in our Pathways. Not saying they're all going to be NRL players. And I don't
How many would be a success out of that 30? Would be a good conversion rate for you?
I think if you've got 4 or 5 long-termers, I think that's a good result. And you've got to understand that, the statistics on players and the number of games they're played with, I think, would astonish people. We did the statistics with David Middleton. I'm just digressing here. We did the stats with David Middleton a few years ago. I think there were 9,500 first-grade footballers in history. I would have thought there were more, but since the beginning of time, there were 9,500. Something like 1,400 played one game. Something like 6,600 played less than 50 first-grade games. If you played 100 first-grade games, you're in like the top 12%. And only 2% played 2 first-grade games. 200 first-grade games. So, the conversion rates, but at the time, that fella that can play 1 first-grade game that week is very important to you. It's certainly important to him, and it's important to you. The player that plays 20 first-grade games is very important to you and to him at that time. And I don't think that the long-termers, once you sort of get to 60 or 80, there's a chance you're going to go on to play 150 or 200. And if you have a great career, well, good luck to you. But it's kind of like you've got to break through that 50-game barrier, because I think it takes you that long to establish yourself as an NRL player. I think a lot of our kids, and the game has been very guilty of paying kids too much and getting them there too early and then writing them off too early because of the scrutiny way too early. I think realistically, I look at it, I think the career of an NRL player is between about 24 and 34 now. Sports science has got them playing longer. Full-time professionalism has got them playing longer, which means we need to persevere with development a little bit longer, which means we can't be rushing them. We can't be paying them too much too early, which I think hurts a lot of them. Even if they've got the talent at 18 and 19, it actually affects them later in their career. And I go back and look at all the ones that started early and they were sort of burnt out by 27, 28. Our top playmakers in the game are all over 32 years of age at the moment, and that would have been unheard of back in my era. When you got towards 30,
you're retiring, weren't you?
Well, you started to lie about your age if you wanted to keep playing because you were sort of written off by that.
How old were you when you retired,
But that was 28. But that's sort of sports. Well, I had a lot of injuries, Anyway, I've identified all these players in the club and I said, now how many of these will fill those top 10 spots in 2 years' time, right? Because that's where our value will be. To give you an example.
What do you mean value? Like to get your worth?
To give you an example.
Right.
So when I first walked into the Bulldogs, right, I sat down and said, show me your roster and show me your salary cap, right? And I've done this with most clubs, but and I say to the board, well, you've spent $9.5 million on your roster, right? Same as every other club in the time. That was the salary cap at the time, $9.5 million. You spent your $9.5 million. If I went out and sold all those 30 players tomorrow, how much would I get for them?
What was the answer?
I rated it about $5.5 million.
You want to be at 10 or above, don't you?
Well, I then did the exercise with Melbourne, Roosters and Panthers, who were the three best teams of the day. I said, now, look at their top 30 roster and tell me how much it would cost to get those 30 players to come and play with us. If I wanted to buy those 30 Penrith players, those 30 Melbourne players, 30 Storm players, 30 Roosters players, and it was 13 and 14 million. I said, that's the true difference in your roster.
So it's an $8 million.
They're paying $9.5 million. But their team is worth so much more, and that's why you're winning comps, and that's why they've dominated competitions. We're paying $9.5 million, but our roster's only worth this much, and every team will be somewhere in between. The idea is to be getting more value out of your spend than you're paying.
Yeah.
And you do that mainly with young fellas on the way up, which allows you then to compensate the players at the peak of their career who you've got to retain and pay the money that they need for their status in the game.
That's what Penrith, and you had a bit to do, obviously, more than a bit to do with the setting up of that pathway system, which is there's still fruit falling off the tree every 5 minutes out there, it seems. So is that easily replicated? Everyone says, oh, well, everyone should do what Penrith do. Now, you've obviously tried to identify areas in Sydney where you can really push and get kids from into the Bulldog system. I don't know if you've got country areas like Penrith have done really well to get your Isaiah Yo's and your Liam Martins.
I think it's bigger than Penrith.
Yeah.
I keep saying this is a game-wide thing. The game needs to be investing in its future, and the game has made some really poor decisions, or it's lacked understanding of its role in this, or what should be its role in this over a long period of time, if in fact they want the expansion that they want, and if they want to keep looking after themselves. And there is so much about the models in our game, about player movement, the dominance of or the power of player managers in this sort of regard, the influence of the media on this type of thing. And I think for the long-term success of any club, you've got to be investing in your future. And I think for the long-term success of the game, they've got to understand the importance of their investment in the future and development. The issue with our game and we keep comparing it with sports overseas, is that if you take the American sports, the professional sports over there, we don't have a collegiate system like they do. They're not bringing their kids into the professional game until they're 21, and they've already been through an amazing collegiate system
3-4 years,
which has prepared them for it. We didn't have that here. The national youth comp, the under-20s comp, which they abandoned some years ago, which was a huge mistake, was meant to replace that. But even that, the profile of that, the fact that it was on TV and the reserve grade, or what they call the Queensland Estate Cup, wasn't on TV, created problems for players, managers, parents, and the game. And because there wasn't that equality, people thought the next step from NYC under-20s football was NRL. It wasn't. Nowhere near it. You've still got years of development to go through to get there, but the players and the managers thought that's what it was. That's why kids were getting too much too early. And senior players didn't go, because what clubs started to do was farm their reserve grade out to other clubs. Everyone would get a second-tier club to go and farm their players out to, and you weren't sort of playing in Broncos colours or Bulldogs colours or Panthers colours. You're off playing in some other thing in front of family and friends at a park, where New South Wales Cup, or that level, that important development level, had sort of lost its profile in the game. The whole thing was messed up. we're slowly getting back there because I think more and more clubs are sort of starting to understand that. The issue for our game, though, is in producing the NRL player to play the NRL game, which is extremely difficult, and only the best get through, and it's quite a filtering process to get NRL quality players through. It's such a hard game to play. You can only do that in NRL clubs. You can't do it in a school system. You can't do it in a college system. You can't do it in a junior league or state base because they just don't have the resources or the coaching or, they need to be in an NRL system. Therefore, they need to be, the only way to do that is to be in an NRL club. And if you're in an NRL club, they're not going to let them kids go. And there's no reward for development. There's no concession for developed players. There's no salary cap benefit, so it's the whole game's not set up like that. Nor have we got enough people that understand that. So we just kind of meander along doing what we're doing. But I think the Panthers thing has sort of lit a fire under everybody.
It's opened everyone's eyes to it.
Well, it's opened everyone's eyes. It was sort of, it was hard work, but even in the building of the facility and the profile it gave them out there with the academy and calling into the academy program. And then we've, other clubs have sort of adopted a similar sort of mode. But we still need support from the game to develop in that, particularly if we're talking expansion down the track.
Gus, what about, we're talking a lot about players, and we'll come back to that, but what about development of coaches? That's
100%.
That's your livelihood, it was for a long time. Are we getting enough good coaches coming through? Because it feels like there can be some recycling of coaches.
I think there's an issue behind that, and I think it's because the ones that are potentially going to be coaches, so your players are retiring and they might want to go into a career in coaching, but these days they just want to be an assistant first-grade coach, where I think a lot of them need to go back and learn what coaching is and how it is coaching, and it's and that's a whole education process, even away from the game of rugby league themselves. They all know football and they all know they're being coached and go to training and do drills and all that sort of thing, but actually being a coach is a completely different science and a completely different responsibility. And even our coach, Cameron Ciraldo, who had a great grounding and outstanding success as an assistant coach at the Panthers, goes into a head coach role. And for the last 2 years, he said, I had no idea how overwhelming it is now to be responsible for 40 staff and media and boards and corporates and everything else that goes around with it. And that's what beats a lot of the young coaches because your club's not set up to support them through that whole thing. And I see a lot of good coaches that lose their jobs early. When you go and talk to them, they know the game. They know the game. They know how to play. They know how to coach. But it's the other stuff that beats them in the end, and they just haven't got that support system. But getting back to development, your development grades are where you develop your coaches as well. And coaches, I think the successful ones have gone on their own personal journey of personal development. I think they need to be more than just football knowledge and more than just football coaches, but managing staff, people managers, psychologists, communicators, the way they communicate with young people today. As they say, we're in the Instagram age. Players, people access their information and their entertainment in 30-second grabs, 1-minute grabs. It's hard, how do you keep a player engaged or different types of players? And remembering too, with all due respect, footballers aren't the ones sitting up the front of the classroom giving the answers, even if they're in school sometimes. We come from some fairly humble backgrounds, the kids that play our game, because they're the ones that play our game.
Yeah.
You've got to have that sort of part of your personality and makeup to actually play this physical game and put yourself through the torture that you put yourself through, both on and off the field. So there's a whole responsibility with clubs around education and welfare, and I think it's only in the last 10 years that we've come to terms with full-time professionalism. We've come to terms with what it takes to build a club. I keep saying it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a club to raise a player. It takes a club to educate and raise a player. And I think there are a lot of lessons out of the sort of Penrith example, I think, which are, now not everyone can do it as big as that. Not everyone, in the end, but everyone should do something. And they should all be compelled to do something. And that's been something I've spoken to the NRL about a lot. It's just hard finding people down there that understand the concept or...
Hey, no fines here. Or no.
What?
We're not going to get fined.
They're not going to fine me. Leave me alone.
Again.
Funny, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but I know that, watching Gus and the way that he's reacted to stuff this year, the pleasure and joy he's got from, the junior teams doing well, I feel like from our conversations we had throughout the year, that you almost get, I don't know if I'm wrong, but you almost get more joy from that, or you get extreme joy from that, because I don't know, again, have you seen the movie Moneyball?
Yeah.
Like I always think of Gus when I see that movie because the character in it, the Brad Pitt dude, who
Billy
likes to,
Bean.
who likes to Billy Bean, is that his name? I
I think
don't
his
know.
name, yeah.
He, likes
Oakland
to,
A's.
he drives around. Now, like I don't know if Gus always likes to be at the actual game when the Bulldogs are playing. Is that
I'm rarely at the game when they're playing.
because you're nervous or?
No, I just like to watch it myself. I don't, and I get pestered too much in the crowd, and I get, not pestered, but I get
Distracted.
too much distraction,
Yeah.
at the games and that sort of thing. I just like to watch it in my own way.
But you take as much joy with a Harold Matts come
Look,
from behind win than a
and that's
NRL game?
but that's everywhere I've been, and that comes back to the very early days when I first started playing at Penrith back in the 70s. The joy for me was being a part of a club. It was about the club and who you played for, and coming through the grades and the excitement of moving up through the system, and training with the senior players was always a big buzz. And I'd sort of everywhere I coached as an NRL or as a head coach, whether it be at the Bulldogs, be it the Panthers, be it at the Roosters, I took a very active interest in developing from within, bringing players through the system. And if you go back through any of the clubs I've been involved with, we always won lower grade competitions. We always had great importance on it, and we always produced a lot of players. And I feel that to manage your salary cap and to manage your club, particularly your club's DNA, the personality and character of your club, if I just go out and buy 30 players from other clubs, all right, to come to your club, and if you're down the bottom, you're usually getting fellas second chance, third chance, last chance. Normally you're overpaying for them, which eats up your salary cap very, very quickly. And you are bringing in, I'll go back to the Penrith example. When I first got to the Panthers back in 2011, I think in their top 25, there might have been 4 fellas that come through whatever system they had through the day. 4 out of the top 25. That's the Penrith with their giant junior league and all their connections and everything like that. There was 4 kids that had come through, 4 players in the top 25. We went around to a number of sports. So when they were asked, what do you want, want you to fix the club, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, what does it look like when it's fixed? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, you want it fixed. What's it look like when it's fixed? What do you think it is? Well, no one really had any idea. They hadn't thought that far, I said, well, unless you know what it looks like, unless you've got a vision for what it's going to look like when it's fixed, how do we know where we're going? So let's go and look at this AFL club. Let's go and look at this European soccer club. Let's go and look at this.
Did you do that yourself?
American NFL club, yeah. And we took people with us. But the most relevant one for us was the Brisbane Broncos, because it was the biggest in our league at the time, and they were the ones that, had a whole state to choose from. They had great advantages up there, but they did it well. And we came back from all of that with the concept that whatever our top squad was, be it 25, and it went to 30 players off that, eventually we would want at least 80% of that, having come to us at teenagers and grown through the system, to be raised as Panthers or be raised as Roosters or be raised as Bulldogs. And that was the DNA of your club. That's how you shaped your club, your personality, your relationships with them, their families, their extended families, and why they would want to stick with you over a long period of time. So when you go back to that Penrith model and you look at the Isaiah Yoes and Dylan Edwardses and Moses Leotas and James Fisher-Harrises, and all these kids that came there at sort of 15 and 16, 17 years of age, that are now married, 2 kids, bought a house, living in the area, and they're the senior players who set the DNA. That's the perfect sort of, case study that you can look for something like that. But we've done that plenty of times at Roosters and other clubs that I'd sort of been at in previous years, and they're the great stories. So, but any club that I was ever involved with, it took a club to raise a child. It took a club to develop a footballer. So when I first went there in 2011, as I said, there was like 4 of the top 25. When I left there in 2019, I think 25 of the 30 debuted with the club. So they'd come through the system themselves. There was more than, which is an extraordinary result. And that's led to that they can keep losing players now and keep having players to replace them. And that's
incredible.
And that's what you're looking for. But there are other clubs that run good systems differently, and they've all got to be a little bit differently. And I think that's where a lot of the other clubs that had the opportunity to do that lost their way. I think there are clubs in the NRL that had the opportunity to run programs like that and lost their way and now are trying to claw it back. And you can't do it overnight. We can't rebuild the Bulldogs overnight. This is a 10-year program. That's just how it's going to. Well, it's a never-ending program.
Don't put the 5-year plan.
Remember that.
But I'm saying to them, like I say to them, boy, like long after I'm gone, you've got to make sure you never stop doing this. Otherwise, you're going to get back to where you were.
Yeah.
Which was in a terrible position.
In this whole rebuild stuff and recreating a club, there's someone who's got to make the hard calls and hard decisions. Like, how hard is it to tell a player he's got to go somewhere else, or B, a coach. I mean, you've had to do that several times over your career. How do you do it?
Yeah, if the right calls are usually the hard calls, but they're the right calls. So that's what leadership is. You've got to make those decisions. You won't get everything right, and if you might get something wrong, you've got to fix it. But what I'm saying is you've got to make those calls. And if they're the right calls, they're usually the hard calls. The wrong calls are the easy calls, because you're avoiding.
Do they keep you up at night? Do you have to, are they stressful for you? Like, I mean, like you
I wouldn't call it stressful, but you don't take them lightly. You don't make those decisions lightly. Like, we've just had a big decision at the Bulldogs to release Josh Addo-Carr. And I love Josh, and I've loved what he's done for our club, and he's been great for our club. And we're cheering him on. We hope he gets a club and he does really well. But what happened in this instance, as a club, we just couldn't walk past it and accept it, and and the ongoing problems that might cause down the track. So every now and then you've just got to put a stake in the ground and say, well, this is what we stand for, and this is what we, there's an old saying: if you walk past it, well, then that's what you tolerate. Well, there are some standards that you just can't, and that can be hard on individuals at times. That can be unfortunate, but it's not. It doesn't have to be relationship ending either. It's kind of like it's just how that's handled over a period of time. But there are some tough calls, and you've got to have tough calls. It's football. It's professional football. It's the hardest conversation is saying to the 22, 23-year-old kid that's been in your system for 5 or 6 years and busted his gut, and he's put his career on hold, he's put his school on hold, he's put his education on hold, he's put his family on hold, he's put relationships on hold. Mate, you're not going to make it.
That's hard.
You're not going to, you need to find a job.
Yeah.
Go and play at your level and get a job, because you can't keep knocking yourself out like this, and we can't keep you in the system like this. And, and our system is wrong at the moment. Our supplementary cap system is wrong at the moment. We got so many player managers running around with kids that they just can't get placed because we can't pay them enough to justify the commitment to train the way they've got to train if they want to be a hope of being an NRL player. It's really tough. It's hard on the young ones these days.
We're going to have a short little break here with Phil Gould. Back in a moment, we're going to talk about working at Channel 9 and how TV kind of relates to how the game is perceived these days. Here with special guest Phil Gould on Footy Talk. Channel 9, so how the game looks when the game is being played. We talk about journalists, the media, all of that, and the game around the game. But the actual product and what people sit down, and that's the thing that attaches a kid, first of all, to the game, perhaps. It might be on the weekend playing, but then the hero factor comes in. How do you see how the game is covered these days, both on Fox and Channel 9, and how it kind of helps the game push along, or what maybe can be done?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Yeah, and I've openly said, in all the years that I've been involved in professional sport, this is my 49th consecutive year being involved in professional football. In the early days, I'll use that term pretty loosely because it wasn't professional, but I've been in this game, and I've been all around being a part of a team and being a part of club and building teams and building clubs and being a part of that camaraderie and all that sort of thing. The best team I've ever been involved with is at Channel 9. The people, the work ethic, the support for each other and everything that they do there, and the talent of the people is incredible. They asked me to give a talk at a function there at Channel 9 one day about the role of television or the role of the people in our organisation, because I wanted to credit them with a lot of the way our game was perceived by the public and the popularity of our game. TV sells the game. That's what sells the game. And I talked about my early days as a coach, where I used to have to, watch video replays of my own team and watch video replays of my opposition team, and I was pretty obsessed with all that sort of thing. We used to have those big VHS sort of things. You'd plug them in the machine and stop, pause, record, and they were black and white, one camera angle, no commentary. And I'd have to sit there and watch hours after hours after hours. It sends you crazy. And it's
explains a few things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's as boring as all thing. And I said, but when I watch it on TV and there's 12 different camera angles and there's commentary and there's colour commentators and there's different angles and different replays and there's different, it's all, that's what sells it. And the spectacular way, the packages that they do, the insights that they give to individual players, the interviews with players and into their personal lives and that sort of thing, the entertainment thing. The Footy show was massive for the popularity of our game and the way it's perceived. And, rugby league television sells rugby league. Trust me, it does. Now, we've just had a resurgence in crowds and everything. Our game is going really popular. At the start of this year, people asked me the state of the game. I said, we're on the doorstep of greatness if we handle the next decade right.
Why do you think that?
Because I think our game is about to explode where other sports aren't. I think rugby's in a lot of trouble, and I think that our game has finally come to terms with what full-time professionalism should look like. I think there's the talk around expansion, I think, which is good, even though in some aspects a little bit rushed, but I think they'll get there. But there was always that, but the television part of it had got it so good, the way they display the game, the way the game is perceived by the public, it's brilliant. You know, what those people do. There are elements of our media industry which I think are detrimental and detracting from the game, and I think it detracts from the game.
Stop looking at me, Adam.
And makes life very difficult for people within the game, but that's just part of the minefield that our people have got to navigate. But Channel 9's phenomenal, and I watch it in all other sports, like just the Melbourne Cup coverage this week, the Olympics during the year. You know, when they take on a sport, the tennis, and what they've done with the tennis, they're the best in the business, by not by a little bit, by a long way. It's absolutely brilliant what they do, and Nine's such a big organisation now, and it's obviously growing as a media sort of empire. But you know, we have to put up with the Danny Weidlers of the world. But you know,
hey,
that's just what happens.
Gus, can you
there's a yin to every yang. So
No.
The thing which people, I know you don't read everything on social media, but a lot of people call out for, remember the thing you used to do, the last word and all that sort of stuff before the game. Can you take us through, like, how much would you think about that before you'd give that pre-game speech, and how hard was it to actually deliver? Like, would you spend a week thinking about what you're going to say? Would you rehearse it? What was your process? Because I always watched it from afar, and I watched it on TV, but I never knew the process that went with it.
That was no one's idea. That came about by accident, and I don't know. I think what happened was we covered a city country game up at Newcastle one time, and it might have been a city country origin game. They'd sort of gone to the origin concept, and I was doing it on Channel 9, and they said, "Could you just run through the team cards at the start of the game?" And I'd seen people do this, you know, and I'm not a TV person. I'm not really good at that sort of thing, you know. So I'm standing in with these two TV lists, you know, and what happened, I don't know why I did it. I don't know what happened is because I got sick of all this thing that country kids were tougher than city kids. You know, there was this whole thing about the country origin, you know, the country kids, you know, they're going to come down and give it to the city slickers and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, I just got this city thing. I said, people talking about the country blacks being tougher than the city blacks, and the city slickers don't do this and that. They think we sit around sipping latte every day. Well, let me tell you where these city boys come from. They come from Ebba. They come from Mount Druitt. They come from Blacktown. They come from here. That's a rough area. They come from the streets of Redfern. They come from here. These blacks, these country blacks won't be beating the city team tonight. And I can tell you the city boys will be sticking to the country, which they did. And when I got back to the commentary, they said, "What happened there?" I said, "I don't know. I just got sick of this." Country fella was stronger than the city fella. We can't help where we're born, you know. So I said, "Oh, that's brilliant. Can you do that next week?" I said, "No, I got no, you know." And that's where it sort of started. So then, when I'd coached Origin, the second time, I was sort of working at Channel 9 at the time, and I gave them real access in behind the scenes, and probably more than they'd ever had before. It was an opportunity for us to do Origin and promote Origin a little bit differently at the time, and we gave them tremendous access into our training and into our dressing rooms and all that sort of thing. And then when I stopped coaching Origin again, they said, any chance before the game you could give a bit of a talk of what your last instruction might be before they run out on the field. Now, how many times can you do that? There's 3 Origins every year, and I thought I'd do it once. So I sort of did, and they said, "That was good. Can you do another one?" I said, "Well, it's the same message." "Oh, well, just put it in a different way." So they never had any input into it or anything, and I would do it myself. Well, in the end, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point, you know, where I can't remember how, but it became a thing, you know, about
it's still a thing.
Yeah, it's still a thing.
Still on Instagram. Instagram Reels.
About standing under the goalpost. You know, was one funny night there. I was standing under the goalpost, and there was just a trickle of rain, and Tony Chalmers, who's our sort of production man on the thing, was standing with me with an umbrella, you know. And we're waiting for the panel down upstairs to come down for the last word. You know, they're going to come down. You've got the final minute and a half to sort of talk, you know, and there's a sprinkle of rain. He's standing me with the umbrella. He said, Sterlo's going to throw to you in, you know, about 30 seconds, mate. I said, right. I said, don't leave. I said, it's starting to rain here. He said, so he's running. He said, he's coming to you now. He's coming to you now. So, right, he ran off with the umbrella. He said, good luck. So there I am standing under the goalpost as it starts to rain heavily. And Sterlo turns around to someone and says, and what do you think the major factor is going to be? And I think Andrew Johns gave like a 4-minute answer or something.
Thanks,
so by the
Joey.
time they come down to me, and Tony's standing over there and he's got will I come back? By the time they got down to me, I was like a drowned rat. Yeah, but it became big. So I think if you're going to do any talk, my thing was good opening, good finish. No one's going to remember what you're
But did
saying.
you think it? Did you have it in your head? Did you rehearse it?
Well, coming up with something different every time and something that was sort of topical and sort of blend into where the game was or where the two teams was. And unfortunately, through a lot of that, Queensland dominated a lot of those areas and what New South Wales, were up against. And, it was really enjoyable and good to do. But how many can you do and how many different angles can you keep coming up with and how many things can you keep to say it? And then I started to get older and I started to trip over words and I can forget things pretty easily. So it was kind of like, well, it's been good, but, I think I'm stretching it if I keep going.
Well, John Farnham came back for a few tours. So will it ever come back? One more? Ever?
I don't know. I'm not even part of the Origin coverage these days. I just do a little bit on the panel. Like we've got a whole new team there. We've had a great succession plan come through. We've got the greatest in the game now, like Cameron Smith and Billy Slaters and these fellas, all the younger fellas.
A lot of Queenslanders, Gus.
Yeah, Sterlo's retired now and Rabs is retired, and I don't think we're going to be too far behind him. So
Billy might do it on horseback next year. He's
Might
doing
do
a
it on
great job
horseback.
this
How
week.
brilliant.
How good was
How
it?
brilliant.
Mate, what a
He's
talent.
brilliant. Those younger blokes that have come through and they're legends of the game. They're going to be immortals. And that's what Channel 9's always been, be it cricket or whatever it is. They've always got the Australian captains. They've always got the best cricketers of the time, and they've come through and been their commentators. And it's the same thought with the succession plan in the commentary team. And we've got the best of the best in our system. And that goes back to your Wally Lewises and your Darren Lockyers and your Brad Fittlers and Andrew Johnses and sort of the new wave that's coming through now with Billy and Cameron and Jonathan Thurston and those players. They're a great team and they get educated really well.
Is television across the board though ruining our coaching system in a way? Like, you're seeing a lot of guys who you mentioned, all those guys, also Cooper Cronk, whoever else you want to name, but
yeah, it's hard.
Like they have this career which is they can analyse everybody.
Yeah.
Or they could go and risk it all like a Benji. Like Benji had probably a TV career waiting for him.
Absolutely. He did.
And he's good at it.
Yeah.
Instead now he's got blokes like me ringing him up saying, well, where are you getting your next win from? And
I remember Peter Sterling had an urge to coach, and people would have said he would have been a good coach and probably would have been, but I remember very early on in my days at Channel 9, he said to me, can I just, what would you think about me going to be a head coach? And I said, why would you leave the best job in the world? You can sit here and coach all 16 teams. Why would you want to go away and just want to coach one? I said, you've got the best job. Like Billy Slater at the moment, I say, he should be a great club coach. He's coaching Queensland and he's working for Channel 9. They're the two best jobs in the country. Why would he leave those jobs? NRL head coaching is a beast.
Is he the pick out of all the blokes who are, like you chose Cameron Serraldo obviously for your club, but I mean if there was a bloke out there right now in the commentary world or in the media world to coach, is Billy the head coach?
The reason I chose Cameron Serraldo, apart from the fact of his football knowledge and all of that, it was that Cameron Serraldo put himself through years of personal development. Part of his contracts at Panthers, and as it is at the Bulldogs now, was personal development. He'd go off to the All Blacks, he'd go off to AFL clubs, he'd go off to NFL clubs. He's been to Google, he's been to Amazon, he's been to the fire brigades, he's gone to all ends of the earth, looking at systems and teams and leadership, and associating with people that have been successful, communicators. We regularly have, you'll have a team come in from university who train lecturers and all those sort of things, looking at the way they present their data and all that. He's just been across to Barcelona and English rugby with a couple of our younger coaches, Josh Jackson and Luke Vella, and looking at the way they present, look at the way the dynamics of the way a club is formed. So there is a whole lot more to this head coaching stuff and building a club and running a club than just knowing the X's and O's and how to run plays and coach kick, pass, catch, tackle, and all that sort of thing. So I think what the head coach in these organisations is morphing into what I probably saw in America 30 years ago when I visited America, and what football managers do in the EPL. And I think it's a far greater role. I think the real coaching these days is done by the assistants, and they've got such a big team now. when I coached, we didn't have assistant coaches. You did everything yourself. I'd have a part-time trainer. I was probably one of the first to get a full-time strength and conditioning coach back in the days, Ronnie Palmer. When I first went to Panthers in 2011, we had 11 people working full-time in rugby league. That's coaches and administration, 11.
What's it at the Bulldogs now?
Well, when I left Penrith, it was 54. And the Bulldogs, it could be 70 by now. Like this, in all sorts, that's administrative and commercial. But, we build our club on best practice coaching, best practice high performance, best practice medical, best practice recruitment and development, best practice education and welfare. They're sort of like your 5 pillars, and they're all related. Someone's got to sit across the top of all that, and then they've got the people that manage each section, and then they've got, and having a coach who is still developing, and he will never stop his own personal development on everything bar just the game itself, is incredibly advantageous to the Bulldogs. And when we signed him, I said to the Bulldogs, we need the next 20-year coach. You've had 3 coaches and 3 interim coaches in so many period of time. Things have been terrible. It's hard to recruit talent. It's hard to recruit coaches. It's hard to recruit staff. It's hard to recruit players and junior players unless there's stability in your club. We need the next 20-year coach.
Is Serraldo that?
Oh, for sure. Well, no doubt. But, unfortunately, in this day and age, people look at that scoreboard on the weekend to work out whether or not a bloke's doing a good job. Everyone in the organisation can be doing a great job. If that scoreboard reads 66-0 on the weekend, people don't see the good job that they're doing. So you need someone to be able to march through that and protect them from that so they can get and carry on. And that's our job, to make sure that there is stability and longevity in the people that run our football program.
Is there any part of you that would like to coach again one day?
Yeah, every day. Every day. I go and bang my head against the wall until it goes away, and then I move on.
You feel better.
I don't think I could coach in this era. Well, I don't think I could. I don't know.
Why?
Well, because it's so different now. It's different. I left coaching at the end of the 99 season. That was sort of 4 years of 5 years coaching at the Roosters and the Super League War and the whole thing, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. I took what I thought would be a year off, and then I would go back to it. That was in 1999.
You know who I blame?
Yeah.
Brian Fletcher.
Yeah, well, that's... Yeah.
Coaching someone like that, trying to point him in the
right
direction.
He might have been one of the reasons I gave it up.
That's what I'm saying. Because he tells some great stories of some of your sprays towards him, and I can totally see why you'd go down that path with him sometimes.
What about Origin, Gus?
Eh?
Would you ever do Origin again?
No. My Origin days are over.
You were close, though, like when Freddie was looking around, was it last year?
No, I wasn't close at all. No, Brad rang me because Brad was obviously looking to hold on to his job and looking for what he thought New South Wales had to do into the future. And he rang and asked me if I would lend a hand, which if Brad asked me to do something, I would never say no. And I said that to him.
Yep.
The same as all his life, if I've ever asked Brad to do something, he never says no. I said, I won't say no. If you need me to do it, I will, but let's have a think about what you need and where you're going. And it became pretty obvious to me pretty early that probably Brad wasn't going to retain the job anyway.
Yep.
But there was certainly, it wasn't at my instigation that I was ever going to get back involved. But if Brad asked, I would help him. But that didn't happen.
One question for each of you then. Any scuttle, Danny, on who might get that role?
Look, has been a push for Laurie. A lot of people say good things about Matt King, who's been an assistant for Michael Maguire, and he's been in systems like the Storm, the Roosters, and he's got a lot of good raps. But I mean, he hasn't, like Gus was talking about, having done the coaching a team sort of thing. I don't know whether you need that basis for Origin. You probably do, but I guess Billy Slater didn't have it. So that's a name I've heard, and Michael Ennis's name gets tossed up a lot. So at the moment, though, I think they're looking for someone that can tick as many of the boxes that they have for Origin. I don't know if there's one person who does tick everything at the moment. Scuttle?
Yeah,
Scuttle?
I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult in trying to replicate what Queensland have been able to do, because I think coaching Queensland's a completely different beast to coaching New South Wales. It's a different dynamic. It's a different culture and personality. And I think that, a bloke like Cameron Smith or a bloke like Billy Slater can walk out of playing and immediately go into a coaching role there and continue along the Queensland origin process, which has been the same pretty much for the 40-odd years, and it doesn't really matter who coaches them. The support system and the culture of their origin is just passed down from team to team, generation to generation. New South Wales is a completely different sort of beast. And I think, being brutally honest, I think it needs to be done by a club coach. And I think that the successful club coaches in your Ivan Cleary and your Ricky Stewart and your Craig Bellamy are the people that should do it.
They haven't got time in that, do they?
Well, I believe they do, and I believe their clubs are set up well enough to do it. The demands, how can I explain it? Clubs are set up now where I think their head coach could have the time to go and do it. It's 3 preparations. You've got plenty of other staff and administrative staff to be doing all the other stuff all year round. I've never thought it was a full-time job for anyone. And I think that probably the coaches took on a little bit too much outside of the actual preparation of the football team than they should have, or that they were allowed to do. That's just my own personal opinion. But I think if they specifically want to get the team's preparation right, and Michael Maguire came in this year, who'd recently coached, and he'd been a head coach, and he'd also been experienced in short-term preparations for big games, which is a different sort of coaching. And New South Wales is different. It's different to Queensland. I think they'd be well advised to revise their opinion that it can't be done by a club coach. And I think one of those 3 should probably do it at the moment. Now, what they would do is they'd go out and get people like, Matt Kings and Michael Ennis's and Laurie Daly's and all those other fellows. Yeah. But I think right at the moment, unless you are a coach, unless you are in your stride of coaching, unless you are in demand management on a weekly basis, I think it's too much for someone just to come in off the street and think, because I was an ex-footballer and an ex-origin player, that I could go and do this. It's completely different in Queensland, completely different. Mind you, Billy Slater is an extremely talented individual, and spent his whole career playing under Craig Bellamy, which has given him that sort of organisational and game analytical strategy, and he's been a part of that origin setup for a long, long time, Yeah. I'm not saying every Queensland origin player could do it, but certainly Billy Slater is one of the better ones that I've seen. But for New South Wales, I think it's different. I think it's really different. And I think we struggled for a long time with that because we just assumed anyone could sort of roll in there because they'd played origin or what have you. And it's hard on them. It's really just dealing with the media, just dealing with the strategy around media, just dealing with, the selection of teams.
It's a showbiz event.
Dealing with who influences the selection of teams, being strong enough to select your own team on your own basis. It's putting together the mechanics of a team and the mechanics of a game plan and the mechanics of a strategy in a short-term preparation with 17 players that compete with each other on a weekly basis, and some will get in there not even liking each other. I mean, it's just there's a whole raft of things that you've sort of got to be able to fix in an 8-day period 3 times a year. It's like 3 major grand finals thrown at you in the middle of the season. So
with journalists everywhere.
With journalists. And to be honest, the only people I think that are truly equipped to do that are the successful head coaches in the NRL. Yeah. We've got good ones there to use them, so I think use them.
Interesting.
I think use them,
Fair enough. Is there such thing as an off-season, just in closing? Have you got a couple of weeks off?
I've only got so many good summers left, mate. Why would I want to watch it?
Any Chinese meals coming up, Gus, where I should be?
There's always room for a Chinese, Danny.
Why is it so much over rugby league is done at a Chinese
restaurant?
Ask
Gus. He is the king of the Chinese secret meeting.
Yeah.
What do you have? What's
a lot of my contracts have got chili stains on them.
Soy sauce.
Soy sauce.
What's on the menu when you do have those secret meals? Is it always the same?
Depends who I'm entertaining. Yeah. You don't see the secret meetings, Dan.
I don't.
You only see the ones we want.
I know the meetings that you are happy to be seen at, and others that you're not happy to be seen at. Have you got any? I'm not a great holidayer anyway. I mean, if I go away on holidays, I'm done after 3 or 4 days. I've had my rest. I've had my break. That'll
do,
and go from there. But
you used to play a lot of golf.
Used to. I played a lot of golf, particularly in between. So I sort of took it up late in life. Dad was a great golfer, and he begged me to take it up, but I was all football and cricket. But I took it up later in life because I needed something competitive personally to do, like having been a footballer and then a coach. And if I wasn't actively involved in doing one of those two things, I needed something competitive to do. So I set about trying to play golf, and I got down to like a two handicap, and I was playing pretty regular. My goal in life was to get a membership at the Australian Golf Club, because when I was coaching the Roosters and living in the eastern suburbs, it'd be somewhere to go and play and practice. And that's what I wanted to do. You know? And the day I got my membership to the Australian Golf Club, which was a lifetime dream, I started work at Panthers, May 15, 2011. And in the next 8 years, I played one game.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
you're not a member still.
That's not a cheap game of golf either.
That's so sad.
Given the
that is so sad. And I had a couple of back surgeries, and old football injuries have got the better of me. I'm thinking about trying to take it up again, but I just don't know. I have a practice swing in the garage, my back hurts, so I've had a couple of back surgeries. He hits
a good ball. I've played many a game of golf with Gus.
Down to 2, you don't get that by accident.
And a good putter.
Yeah, but it's I loved golf, but
it's better than your relationship with golf, given what happened to you.
Couldn't you have called? Didn't James Packer? Couldn't he have organised an Australian Golf Club membership for you somewhere along the line? Don't they have an association with that club?
Yeah, it's John. He hasn't been in Australia for a while, James.
You could have had some Packer influence to get you. Yeah.
Oh, he got me the membership.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Back in 2011. Yeah. But I was paying the fees every year and not playing any golf. I used to drive past it. And,
every time you go to the airport, you drive past it. Yeah. Oh yeah, I've got my membership there.
We go up to the Gold Coast every year just for New Year's. But I'm happy working. I like working. I don't think I'll ever stop working. I don't know if I'll always have a job, but
you'll have a job.
But
there's always a club to fix.
I think you'll be right.
There's always a club to fix.
I don't think I'll ever stop working.
Would you ever work for the NRL itself?
I love the game. And everything I say, everything I do, everything I want to do is for the benefit of the game. Even if it's being critical sometimes, I seem to be critical. I know sometimes they don't like my comment and they don't like what I say, but it's all with good intention. It's because I think it's for the betterment of the game. Whether I'm talking about game officials, whether I'm talking about structures, whether I'm talking about,
the bunker,
salary caps, whatever, I always think what I'm doing is constructive. Now, if they see it as critical, that's their business. That's their problem. But, and I'm happy to be argued against as to whether or not I'm right or wrong. But I do everything with all good intention for the best interest of the game, Obviously, in television, there's a theatrical element to what we do. We've got to entertain and we've got to get people. And I like to think that the people sitting at home in the lounge room will do one or two things. I'll either agree what I say or they'll throw something at the TV. Either way, I think that's a good result.
Great result.
As long as
that's what you're there for.
As long as they're watching and our job in the media is to get people interested in the game, to educate them in the game, to make them enjoy the game. And I try to provide as much of that as I can. Educational, insight, but also entertainment. And from the game's perspective, to keep advancing. As I said, our game is on the doorstep of greatness if we handle the next decade properly. This game, 20 years ago, I was writing about the power of Pacific nations and the incidence of Pacific Island players coming into our game. Back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have many Pacific Island players in it. Even in the 90s, I didn't coach a number of them, but I could see it in the early 2000s where it was gravitating to and what it was happening and what the power of the Pacific Island nations was going to be. To the fact where at Penrith, in the time that I'd spent away from Penrith and in Penrith, and I'd had sort of 3 stints at Penrith as a player, then a coach, and then gone back as an administrator, our junior league registrations out in Western Sydney were like 50% Pacific Island at the time. When I sort of went back and I went, wow, our club's got to represent the demographic of this area. That's one of the first things that we had to do. We needed heroes amongst those players and heroes for the kids. And I think what we've seen in the Pacific Island tests now and the growth and the fact that Tonga are now playing in the final against Australia, the fact that Tonga beat Australia a few years ago, we didn't really get to celebrate that because of COVID hit for the next couple of years and everything died down. But the growth of our game is on the international stage. It's not on the domestic stage. It's on the international stage, and our scope to dominate the Pacific Islands, New Zealand, and if we can actually help the UK, because we desperately need another international rival, and and the history and the tradition that goes along with the UK Super League. We need to own that. We need to look after that. So I think everyone's now seeing the power of that. I was writing about it 20 years ago, but we're all seeing what the power is, and we've got to invest in it, and we've got to help it. A lot of the players that are playing in these international Pacific Island teams are second and third generation Australians. There's still a wealth of talent, and there's still an opportunity to be a part of the Pacific sort of nations. And New Zealand in particular, there's massive opportunity in New Zealand for investment in rugby league. So we're on the doorstep of greatness. Las Vegas is a great promotion. Now, it was a huge promotion back here. I don't know whether it put a dent in anything over there in LA. Probably got to go back in Las Vegas. You've got to go for 20 or 30 years for that to happen. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start somewhere.
You're going next year, until 2025, you're going to have a look?
Well, I'm going to go and I've said I'll go and have a look to see how they operate.
You roll your eyes. Doesn't sound like the worst trip.
I don't like travelling that much, but I suppose as a club, the Bulldogs are going to have to go in the next couple of years. So if we go, we want to do it right. We want to win. And secondly, we want to recover out of it and come well, because this year was the first year, and halfway through the comp, those 4 teams were over. They were all out of the 8, and 2 of them lost their coach during the part of the year. So, you'll be foolish to not see that. So I want to go over and have a look at how the teams are preparing, where they're staying, where they're eating, and then the recovery process of how they get home, when they come home, and is there anything they would have done differently with the visit to not have the slow start to the season that they came through. So Roosters and Manly probably came out of it to some extent. Broncos and South Sydney didn't, and they both lost their coach. Now, I'm not saying Vegas caused it, but there would have been some things that I think in hindsight that are probably done differently. And to be honest, the records of teams, even our premiers that go away and play in England in that World Club Challenge, that can be a little bit average coming back from that as well. So there's a lot to be learned, and also corporately, what can we do there? If we're going to go there, because I think we'd get a large base of our Bulldog supporters and going across I think it's going to be an annual pilgrimage now for rugby league people to want to go and be a part of that event and be a part of that stadium. Massive promotion back here. It was the biggest first game of the season ever.
Unbelievable.
It was, so it was a great job back here. Whether it's going to get American following football or gambling on football, I don't know. That's above my pay grade. And, I won't live to see it. You might. I won't. But someone's got to start somewhere. But, the development of our game internationally is going to be the growth of this game, not domestically. We need to play less domestic football because it's too hard. But the growth of the international game is, I think, the future of the game, and that's where it needs to be invested. Grassroots development, participation, then it comes into elite development, then it comes into NRL, then it comes into international football. All starts down here, but it's got to be promoted up there.
Phil Gould.
That's what drives it all.
Phil Gould, it's been really enjoyable to get your perspective on life, on rugby league.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
And thank you, guys.
Danny Weidler.
Don't ever call me a journalist again. Right?
Did you do
It was
that?
the Journo show.
At least you didn't call it.
But I was building up to the fact that our regular co-host, Michael Chamis, is off filing stories in Vietnam at the moment. So
At least you didn't mention Paul Gallen, because that sets Gus off. And didn't call him Paul Gallen, because a couple of people have done that recently, and it hasn't ended well for them.
I don't know who should be more insulted.
Thank you, Gus.
Thanks,
Cheers.
mate.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Danny.
Gus. Thanks,
Have a
Adam.
good one, everyone.